Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Whitwam Organics Weekly Nursery and Garden Report. My name is David Whitwam, and I am your host. Thank you so much, everybody who is able to join in today. So, today's episode, I'm going to give you my secrets to enjoying your summer gardening season as far as tomatoes go. So, very important. Stay tuned for these really important tips. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the biggest offenders of tomatoes during our tomato growing season, and what I do, what I look out for, and what I do to kind of take care of that stuff. But before I get into today's topic, we're going to jump into our nursery report. So, out in the nursery, things are looking pretty thin. We have been selling a lot of our summer crops. Our spring stuff is kind of wrapping up right now, and pretty much all that we have out there is summer stuff. You guys have been buying lots and lots of summer plants, and I really appreciate it. Typically, so like last year, this time, we were growing tons and tons of summer stuff. Nobody was really into them. They weren't really buying them. So this year we were kind of, hesitant on how much we were going to plant. And you guys are really surprising me. Very happy. And so we've got a lot more summer stuff planted out there. It's just not ready for sale yet. So we've got lots of plugs and lots of plug trays of our summer stuff. It's not big enough yet for us to pot it up yet and put it up online for sale. So that's what's going on. If you want to check out our summer list, and quite frankly, I know a lot of people out there like to buy plants, but the stuff off of our summer list, you really could and should be starting that yourself by seeds. Most of it's seeds, super easy, and you're not at any different level than we are here at the nursery, because we just got the seeds in a few weeks ago ourselves. So save yourself some money, buy those seeds. I'll wrap back around and kind of get into some of that summer stuff later on in my talk. Out in the gardens, kind of the same thing that we have going on in the nursery. We're really just transitioning out of our spring stuff into our summer stuff. I'll tell you what, one of the things I am doing this year, I'm giving it a shot. Not only did I leave a lot of collard greens in the garden beds, but I actually planted new ones. I think collard greens is one of the few things that, when I feel like the plants are kind of done, burned up, getting kind of gross, nasty, I just tear them out and move into summer stuff. But from talking to a lot of people and just from personal experience, I have seen that collards, even though I consider it a winter crop, a heat tolerant winter crop, I have seen it kind of persevere through the summer season. What I'm getting at is what I've noticed with a lot of things, and I'll talk about this with a lot of our crops that I talk about planting in succession, is that you can't really judge a plant on not being able to handle the weather in the next season if it's something that's been in the entire previous season and has had a lot of stress. So, for example, collard plants that you've been picking at, that's pretty stressful for the plant. You're picking the leaves off of it. And so I'm trying to go into this summer season planting. I just put in a lot of little starts, a lot of little seedlings. So I'll wrap back around and tell you guys how that's going. But for the most part, most of my gardens, we are fully transitioning right now into our summer crops. If you have not been on the website, go to whitwamorganics.com and you can see this exhaustive list. It's called Heat Loving Greens and Things. And that is kind of my recommended crops for the summer. But we're not here to talk about that today. So I see a few of you are watching right now live. Feel free to say hi. I can see your posts and your comments. Feel free to be part of the conversation. I'll try and kind of keep up. If I'm talking about something and you have a question, just feel free to type it in there in the comments and I can see it. And we can kind of discuss that. So what we're here to talk about today is tomatoes. And I kind of go on a rant about this every single year about this time. For the most part, I consider tomatoes to be a spring crop, and a fall crop. So sometimes we get them to overwinter if the weather's cooperative, if it's a mild winter, if you want to get out there and cover it up. I don't really consider anything to be a winter crop if it can't take a frost or a freeze. So if I have to cover something up, if it's going to get a frost or a freeze, I really don't put that in the basket with my winter crops. And I don't really consider, I don't consider tomatoes a summer crop at all, even though we do have a few that are extremely heat tolerant. The Everglades tomatoes, the Roma tomatoes that we have, the Floridade tomatoes, and the Homestead tomatoes. So those are heat tolerant. I would still consider them to be heat tolerant spring crops and fall crops. Now, the Everglades tomatoes, I have had and will continue to have them growing in gardens throughout the summer. They're definitely keep producing. They're very strong plants. They're extremely heat tolerant. So that I would kind of consider to be an exception to what we're going to really talk about today. So if you're from up north, I think it was pretty easy for you to figure out when the end of your tomato season was, because there was usually white stuff on the ground. So that was, it's like a wall. Poof. Season's over, plants are frozen to the ground. And as you know, that date can kind of vary from year to year, but you have a pretty good idea when your tomato season is going to be over. So what I kind of want to cover is the exceptions that people bring up. And I want to, the reason why I was talking about growing up north, when people talk about exceptions and the things they do to grow their tomatoes over the summer, in my mind, that immediately goes into the same category as somebody, if you were up north, started arguing with you about how when it snows, that's not the end of tomato season, because they do this and this and this and build this greenhouse and put these heaters up, and you're just wrong. That's not the end of tomato season. Well, so when we start talking about when tomato season ends down here in Florida, and people start talking about all the things they do to extend that season, I'm just letting y'all know, in my head, it starts sounding exactly the same thing as if we were up north and somebody was arguing about how when it starts snowing, it's not the end of tomato season up there. So here's the big secret. The way to have an enjoyable summer season as far as your tomatoes go is when the season's over, you pull the plants out. You move on to something else. You call it quits. And how we know it's time to call it quits are when the 4 horsemen of the tomato apocalypse show up. And those are, so these 4 things. So basically, when you have these 4 things happening at the same exact time, the season's over. So it's not like just one thing like you get if you were up north. You know, it's just too cold for them or it's snowing. So these 4 things that are for me when I'm saying the season's over, it's time to pull the plants out. Horseman number 1 is, well, these are in no particular order because they don't always come in the same order. And this year's a really good example for me to point that out. Heat. So nighttime temperatures are through the roof. If the nighttime temperatures are above 72, 73 degrees consistently, that's one of the 4 horsemen. Number 2, humidity. If you walk outside in the morning and it's not just hot, but it is so humid that you're questioning all the decisions that you've made in your life that got you to that moment right there of living in Florida, that's the type of humidity, oppressive humidity. So that's horseman number 2. So we have heat, not daytime highs. Nighttime lows are high. So it doesn't matter as much how hot it gets during the day. What matters is how cold it isn't getting at night. Okay, so that's horseman number 1 is heat. Horseman number 2 is humidity. Horseman number 3 is our daily rains, and they're coming. I hope. And speaking of that, that's why I'm actually filming outside today, because it's supposed to rain while I'm doing this. And I'm hoping that by being out here doing this, I will make it rain, because we haven't gotten any. Like, we got a little spittle the other day when it was supposed to be raining. So hopefully, fingers crossed, I'll have to cut this short today because I'm getting rained on and I don't want my laptop getting wet. So this is fully intentional being outside today, but we'll see. So number 3 is the daily rain cycle. So when that kicks in and your plants are staying wet all the time, that's another one of the horsemen. And number 4 is the insect pressure. The specific insects that I'm usually looking for are the types of sucking insects like leaf-footed bugs and stink bugs. So when they show up in mass, now the reason I'm talking about the 4 horsemen of the tomato apocalypse is because I feel like you can mitigate if we're only dealing with 1, 2, or 3 of these things, except one, depending on the type of tomato. So high morning temperatures or nighttime lows are high. Depending on the type of tomato you have, they might not be producing fruit. So some tomatoes won't even produce fruit if it isn't getting below 68 degrees at night. Typically, the temperatures that the tomatoes need for nighttime lows, there's a direct correlation between the size of the tomato. This is a general rule. There's totally exceptions, but I'm speaking to new gardeners right now, or people who are from up north and just didn't have to deal with this. There's a pretty good correlation between the size of the tomato and the nighttime temperatures that the tomato can handle and still set fruit. So basically, the bigger the tomato, the colder it needs it to get at night. The smaller the tomato, the higher the temperatures it can handle. So Roma tomatoes, I found, cherry tomatoes, Everglades tomatoes, they can handle nighttime temperatures 74, 75, 76 degrees, no problem. So that one's a little bit dependent on the type of tomato. But the bottom line is once, even if you have a type of tomato that can handle higher nighttime temperatures and still set fruit, if we're dealing with daily rain, high humidity, and insect pressure, you're going to get some disease on your plants. So the reason why this is a really good year is because some years they all just kind of happen at once. And what was it, a couple of weeks ago, we were dealing with really high daytime temperatures and really high nighttime temperatures already. I think I saw some mornings where it didn't get below 75, a couple mornings it didn't get below 78, but we didn't have the humidity and we didn't have the daily rain. So although some of the tomato plants got stressed out or had a gap in their production, we didn't lose the plants. And I was willing to get in there and fight for the plants. So basically, the problems that can come from each of these, so the problem that can come from a higher morning temperatures is the plant might not set fruit, but the temperatures might drop back down in a week or two. So you might struggle through that. The humidity at night or during the day, that can cause different blights, diseases, black spot, fungal diseases, molds. If that's the only thing you're dealing with, it might be worth it to try and mitigate with either thinning out the plant or using some sort of fungicide or other pest control methods. Daily rains, when the daily rains kick in, if that's the only thing we were dealing with, if we didn't have high humidity, but that's usually coupled with high humidity. But if we were getting daily rains without the high humidity and it was still cooling off at night, maybe I would be out there trying to cover my tomatoes up and keep them dry or something. If the insects were the only thing I was dealing with, I'd be out there trying to like spray them or deal with them. When you're dealing with all four of these things at once, it's about completely hopeless. And yes, there are things that you can do maybe to extend your tomato season, like bring them into a lanai and hand pollinate, but that's not going to take care of your humidity problem, and it might keep the insects and the rain off, but you're still dealing with the high nighttime temperatures. So what I found is that this day, this cutoff time, so the end of tomato season, happens every year somewhere between Mother's Day and Father's Day. That's usually about when I'm calling it quits on my tomatoes. If you want to average that out to June 1st, first week of June, whatever, that's really important for next spring. If you're planting new tomato plants, you want to kind of look at that date, pick a date somewhere between Mother's Day and Father's Day. If you want to be really, conservative, pick Mother's Day. If you want to be real crazy, pick Father's Day, and count backwards from there. Look at the seed packet. If it's a 90-day tomato, count back 90 days. That's when your tomato plant is supposed to get its first productive harvest. So you need to add more weeks on there if you want more weeks of harvest in addition to that. Otherwise, you're just going to be disappointed every single year. So just in the same way, if you were from up north or even from here and you're planting your tomatoes in the fall, you want to look at your average first frost date and kind of count backwards from there. We've had some really mild winters here lately in Tampa. So, I mean, I've planted my tomatoes later than usual, but I'm kind of knowing that I'm really, really pushing the envelope. I get it. Tomatoes, it's one of a lot of people's favorites. But really, when the four horsemen of the tomato apocalypse come galloping through your garden, I really recommend it's time to pull the plug, get rid of those plants, either move into whatever you're going to do for the summer. That is a good opportunity to start doing it, whether it's putting in a cover crop, covering up your garden, amending the soil, putting in summer crops, whatever it is you're planning on doing for the summer. Once we get into the cycle of our daily rains, that high humidity, the high heat, and the sucking insects show up. And the reason why I kind of make a distinction with the sucking insects and the tomatoes is because of the damage that they actually do to the tomato. So they're kind of a one and done. Like they show up and they're a true bug. They don't have working mouth parts. They have a piercing proboscis, and they just pierce the tomato. I believe they actually inject something into the tomato, or maybe they get bacteria in the tomato. I'm not really sure about that. And they suck out the juice. But just like when you get a mosquito bite, there's something left behind. So the tomato won't ever ripen. They'll get a bad spot on it right there where the insect pierced it. Now, I think they're nymphs. Well, anyway, the non-adults of these insects are showing up right now. They look like a bunch of little, very, very large ants. They might be all around your tomatoes. And again, some people recommend getting a wide mouthed container with soapy water in it and put it under them and shake them off on there. I'm out there doing that right now. Why? Because the daily rains haven't started yet. Because it's still getting into the lower 70s at night. So I'm out right now dealing with one of the horsemen of the tomato apocalypse because all four of them have not consistently shown up yet. So I'm not saying not to fight these things. Definitely get out there and try and extend your season, but just understand you're only extending it out a few weeks. So maybe you want to be out there doing that if you have a bunch of beautiful tomatoes on your plants and you're just waiting for them to ripen. Absolutely try and keep those bugs off your plants, because once they pierce those tomatoes, they're really not going to ripen very well. So let's look. Melanie Joy says, when the level of humidity makes you question all the decisions. Oh, she's just laughing at what I said. Yes, exactly. When the level, like how humid, I don't really know the exact percent of humidity. I'm sure you could look it up. That is when it becomes incredibly uncomfortable outside. But, when you first wake up in the morning and you go to leave the house, and as soon as you open the door, you just get hit in the face with a wet blanket and it's just oppressive. That's the type of humidity that I'm talking about. So, that really hasn't kicked in yet. We've gotten some mornings like that, and I know it's coming. It's right around the corner. So depending on where your tomatoes or plants are at in their growth cycle, it's, if they haven't even started producing yet and you have some larger variety of tomato, keep going if you want to. If they're disease free, they're not having any problems at all. So I push the limits on my plants in a season. Don't get me wrong. I don't just basically go out there and start ripping out plants based on a calendar date or based on a few things that I've seen and heard. I'm watching my plants intently. What I'm talking about is when particular plants start having particular problems, and I know I'm already outside of that plant season, I don't waste a bunch of time, money, and resources on trying to rehabilitate that plant. So I've had a lot of people ask me, well, what about if my plants aren't producing going into summer, can I take the plants and like move them into a lanai or something and pamper them through the summer and plant them back out somewhere in the fall? Go for it. But just do yourself a favor. When you go to plant that out in the fall, take another plant that's new, start some seeds in July, or buy a start that's a fresh start that hasn't struggled through the summer, and put that out in your garden too at the exact same time. And when you actually see these plants growing side by side, this is why I'm saying do yourself a favor. You won't ever bother with that again. It's not worth it. And I can tell you that. Other people can tell you that. Some people are just hard-headed, and that's a good thing. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. But don't do a non-variable experiment and think that it was successful. Make sure you have a control side by side so that you can really see. What I mean by a controlled side by side is, if, let's say, the plant, you put it out in the fall and it's doing okay, you don't have a reference to know, or if it dies of a disease in December, you don't really have a reference to say whether or not that did well or it didn't. So buy a $4 tomato plant, put it out there next to it in the fall of the same one that you struggled through the summer, and just watch them side by side. And please, anytime, prove me wrong. Maybe it does work for you. I've never been successful with that, especially to the extent of how well stuff does when it's fresh coming into its next season. Donna Lambert asks, do Everglades tomatoes survive? That is a really good word. Yes, they do survive. They do produce. I do not put any energy into them. I let them go wild. What I found is that although they are very heat tolerant, they're still not impervious to a lot of the like molds and mildew type diseases that the tomato plants can get over the summertime. So, and they're such a wild and crazy plant. You're going to drive yourself nuts by trying to perfectly trellis them up and getting them nice and spread out so that they aren't affected as much by the humidity and the rain once that really kicks in. So you end up with this kind of just mass of a tomato plant, and you can usually see like the disease like starting in one area and just kind of ravishing through the plant. But it's such a strong plant and crazy plant that it will often kind of outgrow that in another spot, in another area. I have had a few weeks, maybe 2 to 6 weeks back to back, where my Everglades won't really produce. And I still follow this this rule as I'm kind of rounding the corner into into the fall. So it being such a heat tolerant plant, basically once the daily rains kind of kick in, if my tomato plants, my Everglades tomato plants, start suffering from some type of mold or mildew type disease, I will usually get more started that I will then replant in another spot. And then once those start producing, I'll rip these other ones out because, I mean, you could trim them all back and clean them all up down to the like lowest growth nodes, refertilize them, add some new soil and let them flush back out. Or I recommend planting in succession if you end up with one of these like moldy, mildewy diseases, because basically if we end up having a wet winter, that stuff's just going to flare right back up again. So Jasmine Marie, what do you use for pest bug control? Something is tearing up my Brussels sprouts. Jasmine, I don't really know where you're tuning in from, but if you're anywhere in Florida, Brussels sprout season is way over. Jasmine also says, so tomatoes are headed out of season. Sorry, still newbie here. Yes, that's what this whole video is about. Down here in Florida, the end of tomato season is coming, and you can go back and watch the whole beginning introduction. But basically, we got 4 things that are coming. Some of them are already here, and that is heat, high nighttime temperatures, rain is coming, gonna be raining every day, humidity, it's here off and on, and then the summer insects. And basically, when we're dealing with all 4 of those things with our tomato plants, in my mind, that is absolute equivalent of being up north and getting your first freezes, frost, or snow in the fall. That's when the season's over. And it can fluctuate from year to year about when that happens, but you have a pretty good idea in your head. And what I was saying is here in Tampa, that is somewhere between Mother's Day and Father's Day is usually when we're calling it quits on most of our tomatoes. Again, we do have some heat tolerant varieties. The Floridades I found will actually go pretty far in, well, we'll go into summer. Remember, guys, it's still spring. So the first day of summer is June 20th. So when we're talking about stuff going into summer, I mean, like that might be July 1st. Some people tell me that they're in their mind, their kind of last day of tomatoes is July 4th. So somebody said any slicing tomato that you get to eat out of your garden on July 4th is an absolute gift from God. So that kind of gives you an idea of what we're working with. So, you know, that still kind of falls in my category of the timeline, because if your tomatoes are barely ripe around Father's Day and you put them on the counter to ripen, you could be eating a tomato from your garden on July 4th. Cherry tomatoes tend to go a little bit longer, but somewhere around this time frame, it's time to call it quits. Now, the good news is that it's when the tomato season's over, okay, it is almost time for tomato season. So if we kind of, I'm not really sure, we don't really have it. I would say first potential frost date in Tampa is sometime in November. I think first average frost date is sometime in January, which is kind of funny because like average last frost date is like February, like Valentine's Day. So I usually kind of think of like around Christmas is the date I work backwards from. And so if you want an 80 or 90 day tomato, let's see, let me get my calendar out. This has to do with what we're talking about for what you're doing with your tomatoes for summer. Just bear with me. So follow me on this. What I'm trying to say is that for most tomato varieties, the end is near. I don't know when it's happening. I don't know exactly when it's coming, but it's coming. So sometime probably before Father's Day, the 4 horsemen of the tomato apocalypse are going to ride through your garden and it's going to be done. However, if we look at, say, Christmas as being the earlier possible first frost date here in Tampa, and we want to get a 90-day tomato, right? So that's 3 months to grow from seed and for it to start producing. So we're going to go back December, November, October, right? So if we planted it in October by seed, then the tomato plant would start producing right around Christmas. But we don't want that. We want to have been harvesting from the plants for, a good few weeks. And as I was saying before, most tomatoes, they like it. What they really, really like, let me tell you perfect tomato weather. What they really, really like is that when you wake up in the morning, you want to have coffee outside. And you would consider swimming that day. So without giving you guys exact temperatures, I just told you the secret weather of what tomatoes really, really prefer. So if it's any colder than that, like I'm not saying cold mornings, you might want to go outside and have coffee in the morning, but if you don't want to go swimming that day, later on in the afternoon when it finally warms up, then it's a little on the colder side of what they really prefer. And then if it's so hot and freaking humid in the morning that you wouldn't even consider, or you don't want to have coffee outside in the morning, then now we're getting on the hotter side. So if you want to have coffee in the morning, that means it cooled off enough at night. And then if you want to go swimming during the day, then it's warm enough. And that's like perfect tomato weather. So what I usually look for is, when do I think that weather is going to kick in? And that's when I want my tomato plants to begin their production cycle. That's when I want them flushing out their first flowers. So if you're looking at a 90-day tomato, that would be at about the 8 to 10 week mark. Okay, so about 2/3 of the plant's growth initially is growing and making roots. And then, so if you're looking at a 60-day tomato, take 2/3 of that, 90-day tomato. So 2 months is going to be growing, and then it'll start flushing out flowers. Right when it starts flushing out flowers, that's when you want it to be flushing out flowers right when the weather gets perfect, because then it's going to set fruit. So if we were to assume, and this is a big assumption, that weather kicks in somewhere around what? I mean, y'all can totally argue with me on this, but I would say it's somewhere between the last week of September and the first week of November is when we're going to hit that comfortable weather where it's not too hot and it's not too cold. We usually get our first cold front through. At least it drops that humidity out of the air. I'm not talking about cold weather. I'm not talking about winter weather. I'm talking about you just don't want to die when you go outside in the morning. That's what I mean by cooling off for tomatoes. So somewhere between the last week of September to the first week of November is usually when that weather kicks in. So if we're going to kind of average that out, let's say the second or third week of October. So let's just halfway through October, right? So we want to back off from there at least 2 months. So we're going to go back October, September, August. So we're already back at August. Okay. So if you really wanted to go crazy, you could even maybe back that up another couple weeks and be putting seeds in somewhere in the middle of July to the end of July to the beginning of August. So if our tomato season from last year is ending right around Father's Day, okay, and you're going to start seeds for the fall, like you can almost hold your breath and get over that little bitty hump that you're not going to have tomatoes growing. Now, granted, you're not going to actually have tomatoes till they produce fruit in October, but as far as growing tomato plants and dealing with tomatoes, we're only talking about, let's just say, from June 20th to July 20th or August 10th. It's just a few weeks. So, like, tear your plants out get something else going in its place. And now granted, I don't straight seed my tomatoes out in the garden at the end of July. That would be crazy. I start them in seed trays, cell trays. You know, you can find yourself little things like this and start them in this, or bigger cell trays, somewhere where you can kind of leave them like out. So this would be a nice spot. Leave them out where they're not going to, and where if we get some like crazy rain or something, maybe you can protect them. I do have a shade cloth above my head right now that would diffuse some of the rainwater if we got our pounding rain. So you do want to protect them from some of the elements. And we plant them out into our garden usually around, I don't know, mid-September. I know some people wait a little longer. That's fine. But what I found is that I'm usually just kind of watching the tropical storms. That's kind of the big one. Like if we're getting back-to-back hurricanes and tropical storms, I might wait a little while. If it looks like the season's kind of calming down a little bit. I mean, our hurricane season goes until November, so you're not going to like predict it all the way through. So at some point around September, once I have pretty strong plants, you know, maybe something like this, and I trim up all the leaves off of it. So a nice strong plant, you know, something like not a little baby start. So once I have good strong plants, I'll take these out and plant them out in my garden. And that usually, if I'm starting the seed at the end of July, somewhere between the end of July and the beginning of August, I usually have pretty strong plants by sometime in September. And then they kind of explode, and then they put their flowers out right about when the weather's changing and getting nice. Another little pro tip, if you're going to plant your tomato plants and they're nice and leggy like this is actually what I look for in my plants, and you lay them on their sides like this for 24 hours, this growth tip will actually bend upwards really nice. See, this is a pretty, if I try to do this, I might actually snap the plant, but lay them on their side for a little while and they'll actually bend up like that. And then you bury them in the ground like this sideways, and they'll actually root all along the stem. I know some people that just bury them as deep as you can. That's another option. But a lot of times if you've put in amendments, you got to realize that tomato plant's roots when you first plant it are way down here. So if you've used anything from fertilizers to worm castings, anything like that, those tend to be like in the couple top inches of your garden, and your plant really won't see that stuff. So by planting them a little bit more shallow and having this bend up, so I'll plant it up like right to there, right? That's all you would see, like that. And this whole thing is under the ground. You don't have to dig as deep of a hole either. So that's a little tip on planting your tomatoes. So don't be afraid. So this is kind of my point is, if we're tearing out our tomato plants somewhere between now and Father's Day, and we're not going to actually be planting more tomato plants out in the garden until maybe the end of September, that's July, August, September, that's like a whole season that you can plant some of this great stuff off my Heat Loving Greens and Things list. So make sure you go check it out on the website, Heat Loving Greens and Things. There's actually lots of melons, lots of squash, a couple types of lettuce that we actually grow all summer. I just recommend putting the seeds in, putting them in really tight, let them germinate, and harvest them as like baby plants instead of trying to get full heads of romaine. Anita, hey, okay, I love my Everglades tomatoes. Easy to start, new plants from cuttings and water, roots in a few days. I also plant them in a large hanging basket instead of trying to trellis. That's a really good idea, like those old topsy-turvy. So just kind of let them hang down. They definitely probably wouldn't get as clumpy and have all of those mold and mildew problems. In the ground, they make a bush in my yard and end up being my snack for gardening time. They're really great because you can kind of just throw them somewhere and forget about them. What I was recommending to people earlier is just don't bend over backwards for them, because there's still a tomato plant. if you got some place that you can put them and just really not worry about them and enjoy them, if you get them over the summer, you're more than likely going to do well with them. But don't, if you end up with one of these mold or mildew problems on your tomato plant, or a blight or something, don't beat yourself up. You didn't do anything wrong. It just happens. And at that point, the best thing you can do is tear the plant out, move into a different type of plant in a completely different family, or let the spot sit for a couple months. But if you don't want to leave it empty, then you definitely want to move on to something else that isn't like a tomato, pepper, or eggplant. So that's pretty much it. I know, Corey, yes, you did. You missed the garden report. I was just telling people how the best way for them to deal with tomato plants for the summertime is to rip them out and move on to something else. Organic gardening 101. But you've heard that from me for quite some time, so you didn't miss anything, man. So if anybody else has any questions that you didn't kind of post on here today, look at that. It is not raining. I thought for sure if I did this segment outside today that I would make it rain. I'm very upset and disappointed. They were calling for I thought it was going to be raining by now, but I've been thinking that for a week. What is going on? Did anybody else out there get rain over the past couple of days that we were supposed to be starting our daily rain cycles? Because Christine asks, are there issues with watermelons in the summer? So I have 3 different kinds of watermelons now. We have our icebox watermelon, which I've consistently grown all summer for about 8 years. It's a smaller watermelon. It actually has a pretty flexible skin on it and almost no rind. And I do really well with those all summer long. The Florida giant watermelon that I have and the Jubilee watermelon, I've been doing very well with those for quite some time, planting them in the beginning of spring and growing them, and until I harvest the watermelon, which is right about now. We're harvesting the crap out of them. Then I plant them again in around mid-July to August, kind of like the same season with the tomatoes. But the Jubilee and the Florida giant watermelon, I don't have high hopes for it, but I am putting out new plants right now out in the gardens. Because I want to see what they do. So for the most part, I would say most watermelons are not going to do good all summer long. But basically, guys, here's the deal. The first day of summer, right around the first day of summer, June 20th, right? Let's just, let's call that a wall. It's not a very thick wall, right? But it's a very steep wall. Let's just call it like that, right? And there's a lot of stuff. It's got nice little curves on either side, right? So there's a lot of stuff. I'm backwards to you guys. So there's a lot of stuff that can make it all the way up to that wall, but it just can't make it. So this is like June 5th right here, right? And then it just gets really, really steep, really, really fast. So a lot of stuff cannot handle getting over that summer solstice. The days are just too long and we got too much going on. I really invite you guys to look at graphs. Most of y'all probably wouldn't find this very interesting, but look at graphs that graph the number of hours of sunlight throughout the entire year. And what you'll find is that as we approach summer solstice, same thing happens on the winter solstice, but the opposite. The rate of change slows down drastically. So to the naked eye, and for all intensive purposes and what your plants care about, the longest day of the year goes about 3.5 weeks before the summer solstice and about 3.5 weeks after the summer solstice. So for all intensive purposes, we're about to hit the same amount of sunlight, the sun being in the same angle in the sky, the rays of the sun being just as intense for about 6 or 7 weeks, with the summer solstice being right in the middle. So that's that hump. That's that steep hump that a lot of plants have trouble really getting over. So a lot of stuff will grow like right up to this point. And why? Just all of a sudden, out of the blue, right now at the end of May, beginning of June, just all hell breaks loose and stuff starts looking like shit. It's just summer. It's just the summer solstice. And then about 3.5, 4 weeks after that, a lot of that stuff you can get it planted and get it started again. The only problem is that a lot of times that's like when we're hitting our rainy season. So those plants need to be able to handle heat and humidity and rain and all that fun stuff. So it's not just, I don't know. So to me, to consider something like a hardcore summer plant are ones that can actually make it over that hump. And I don't know if these Florida Giant and Jubilee watermelons can. And I do know that the icebox watermelons can. I almost grow those year round. Pretty much, if we don't get a frost or a freeze, I can grow those watermelons year round. So let's see here. Who got rain? Did anybody get rain? Cindy, no rain in Seminole Largo. Carlin, we have gotten 0 rain and I'm pissed. Yeah, me too. 0 rain in South Tampa. No rain here, Michael Thorne. All of my rain barrels are completely empty and bone dry. Christine, I planted Jubilee watermelons and they are growing like crazy. I have 5 to 7 fruits. One is about 9 inches. Yeah, that's where some of mine are too, Christine. That's what I'm saying. Like I think you're going to do absolutely fine with those. Whatever fruits you have going right now, let them ripen all the way. And then go ahead and pull the plants out. And if you want to wait until about mid-July, end of July to put more seeds in, you'd probably do really well. Do tomatilios last through the summer? My first year growing them. Michael, I have no idea. I am not a tomatilia guy. And admittedly, I have never grown them. Maybe someone can chime in on the tomatilias and how they do over the summer. Christine, how big do the fruits get? Huge. I believe they can get like 15 to 20 pounds. But it's a big old watermelon. I have had some fruits that were about this big, but average has been like yay big. Main thing is look for, knowing when to harvest watermelons is a whole nother segment. Maybe we'll talk about that next. Corey, once a few days ago in Spring Hill, in the last 3 months, enough rain to reverse the hydrophobic soil surface. I don't even know if I got that. I think we got a little bit at night. It looked to me like stuff was a little bit wet. And then like during the day, that next day, it's about 2 or 3 days ago, it like spittled a little bit. And Michael says, well, then I'll let you know. So guys, if you have any other questions, comments, or concerns about tomatoes, if you start getting really specific with your questions, I'm probably going to tell you the same thing I tell everybody else. If it's really that bad and we're past Mother's Day, it's time to pull the tomatoes out. So that is, in conclusion, the short end of the story is if it's past Mother's Day and you're having that many problems with your tomatoes, call it quits, move on to something else. If you're having trouble calling it quits, I'm trying to make life easy for you. Go check out my Heat Loving Greens and Things list. You might find some stuff. You can find 5 things on that list that you love every single year. It's going to make it so much easier for you to rip out your tomato plants because you will need to make room for them. So the callaloo, the red amaranth, the New Zealand spinach, Malabar spinach. There's a very large list of a lot of really interesting vegetables. And like I said, if you could just lock yourself into 5 things that you are looking forward to, it's going to make it so much easier for you to transition out of your winter, spring garden and into your summer garden. And you won't be asking these questions anymore. So if you just, have that mindset of your typical garden that you grow from May or from October through May, it makes life really hard for you at the end of May and June as things are kind of coming to a close. But if what's the line from that song? Every new beginning is some other beginning's end. So if you can actually get it to where this time of year is a beginning time for you, not an end time for you, it makes the ending of the previous chapter much more easy to swallow. So Michael Thorne says, is there a difference in your red amaranth and red garnet? No, they're very similar. If you've tried the red garnet before, they're pretty much, I mean, taste-wise, I can't tell a difference whatsoever. But that's going to about wrap us up for today, guys. Like I said, I tried to make it rain for y'all by having my live segment outside, and apparently it didn't work. Maybe I'll go wash the car. And as our good old friend John Starnes used to say, that he was going to go hang up his laundry to dry outside. But guys, listen, please don't everyone start doing a rain dance at once. This happens every year, gets dry around April or May, and all y'all fools go out there and start doing a rain dance, and then the spigot doesn't turn off for 3 months, and then we get drowned. So, maybe we can have a place we can coordinate who's doing a rain dance when, so that we're not all doing a rain dance at the same time, because it can be a little much. But anyway, I hope you guys happy gardening. Tear out those tomato plants. Don't be shy, and move on to your summer stuff. Thanks for tuning in. Oh, if you're watching this pre-recorded and you have a gardening question or a topic you want me to cover, you can send those to info@whitwamorganics.com. That's my email address, and I will cover that in one of my next segments. Michael says, I'm sorry, just one more thing. I bought a 100-foot hose and it rained. There you go. That's exactly what I'm talking about. So just a little tip. One of the things I've been doing, I don't think I have it over here, but like this is a Jamaican cherry behind me right here. And we have hoses all over the property that we use to hand water stuff. So on some of my perennials that were getting dried out, I have brand new good sprayers on everything, but most of the time, you guys know your sprayer leaks a little bit, your hose sprayer. And so I've just been dragging that around and dropping it at the base of the trees because I have brand new hose sprayers. Mine don't leak. So I've just been untwisting it a little bit, so a little bit of water dribbles out. And I've got them in the front yard, and I've got them in the backyard for some of my trees. And I've just been dragging that around, and I put it on a different tree every single night, and everything's doing fine. That's keeping me from out there like hosing everything off. Now, granted, your annual's a totally different story. I'm talking about your trees, maybe some of your larger potted plants, but that's my other dry weather tip of the week. Thanks a lot, guys, for joining me, and I will see you guys next week. Bye.